All right, hello everyone. I have a very special guest today, and I think you're going to find this very informative. It's going to be something that is on the top of everyone's mind. It's on the top of the news. It's getting beat to death with my interpretation of it, misinformation over the top, and that's immigration reform and immigration um, enforcement, deportations, and what we see with ICE going around and rounding up illegal immigrants and criminals. And I'm very pleased to have Evan Draim, who is the Assistant Chief Counsel for ICE in the Atlanta field office. And for the record, he is speaking on his on personal behalf, not for the agency. And we're going to dive into some serious issues, and we spent a lot of time talking before this interview to make sure we are on the same track. And actually, the questions that I ask and when we talk about are things that he's knowledge of in his professional capacity, so that we're not just adding to the myths. We're going to go into so many things, and I'm just as I say with all my interviews, my high-ranking military people and retired people that I'm endorsing. I'm just at all in that one, you're taking the challenge to even do this in this environment. It has to be tough. It's not just like being a regular lawyer. It's not even I would say not even a murder case that's high profile, that's stressful. This has got to be just one of the most stressful legal jobs you could ever have in this environment. And I would just like for you to discuss all the different topics that we're talking about that you have the expertise in, and really explain to the voters and the people of America what's going on and what the truth is, because we spent a lot of time talking. I did a lot of research beforehand. This has been a hot topic for myself as well. I've had a lot of conversations with friends and lost some friends, pissed a lot of them off because I take up for what's going on a lot of things. I've well versed myself in a lot of the issues and the legalities. But I listened to a video watched a video that you did explaining some of the things, and that's why I wanted to do this interview, because it's things that people need to know, and I wanted to really expand on that. You didn't have a lot of time, really. You just sort of brushed on some things. And I asked a lot of my friends, I asked a lot of people. I'm blowing up social media now in Virginia. I'm challenging the Republican Party for the disastrous results of the election, handing it to the Democrats. I'm challenging the status quo, and it's not that I'm taking up for the Republican Party or conservatives, because anybody that knows me now knows I'm heavily challenging my Republican Party in Virginia, and want to hand it back to the people and dismantle the party, period. So I'm making a lot of enemies across the board. This is not that I'm some heavy conservative guy that's just taking up for Trump, even though I do support him heavily. And this interview is done with and through Veterans for America First Pets for Trump. So Evan, what I'd like for you to do is just tell us a little bit of your background. That's phenomenal in itself. You're a JAG officer in the military, and you got out and you jumped on board with this when the president started the heavy hit. I'd like to, a side note here is I've spent a lot of time around Tom Homan, and you know I found it interesting that he's been demonized, and then the left and the media tries to act like he's some crazy Trump appointee, when in reality he was one of the best ICE enforcers under the Obama administration, and actually got an award. And it's just beyond me that how the left has actually incited. Even I see a lot of conservatives and I say mostly more moderate Democrats that have even turned on the president because they believe that he sent out a bunch of Nazis to round up innocent people and just put them on a plane and take them away with no due process.
Yeah.
So I would like for you to give us some of your background and tell us what you do, and then we'll get into the serious questions.
Yeah. Well, I'll begin by saying I think the that Nazi comparison is just so ridiculous. I mean, border security, securing the border of a country is the oldest function of any government. You go back in human history for thousands and thousands of years before governments were doing anything else, long before we ever had a modern welfare state. The first reason why human societies ever created government was they said, hey, we have society. We need to determine who can come in and out of these borders, and a government is going to preserve law and order, is going to have an armed force to defend the border. That was the oldest thing that governments used to do and should still be doing. That's the core function of government. So to say that to promote border security and enforce immigration law is makes a government into fascists is ridiculous. That would make every government for all of human history fit under the definition of fascism. And as a conservative, I obviously think that the role of government is limited, but one of those limited roles is something that is so foundational and a core responsibility of government since the beginning of human civilization, and that is border security. So, my background is I do have a quite a my own history in conservative politics. Starting when I was in high school, I was the youngest delegate to the Republican National Convention in 2012. I actually ran a campaign out of Northern Virginia. I was in Northern Virginia congressional district and represented that district to the Republican National Convention when I was 17, and got a lot of exposure doing that and trying to promote conservative values to younger voters. And through that, I also formed a close friendship with Charlie Kirk.
Mhm.
And right as he was starting Turning Point USA, we actually met before he started that organization. And I helped him when I was at the convention to meet some donors that he needed to get seed money for Turning Point. And we maintained a lifelong friendship for the next 14 years until obviously his murder, which was devastating to me, both for the conservative movement, but also for me on a personal level. After graduating from high school, I went to Princeton University. I survived being a conservative at Princeton. When I was at Princeton, we had our own BLM, Antifa type riots on campus. They tried to shut down our university president's office. They issued him various demands, and we started a counter organization to try to fight back and try to make sure that they were not shouting down or intimidating conservative voices on the campus. And we ended up defeating a lot of the demands from the protesters just by mobilizing a silent majority, a majority of students and alumni that weren't as radical as the group protesting and
Mhm.
didn't often get heard in campus debates. So we're able to have a small success in a pretty heavily blue constituency there at Princeton. And then after graduating from Princeton, I worked for 2 years for a nonprofit organization in Virginia. I worked with people with disabilities and veterans with disabilities. And through that experience, I discovered that I myself wanted to join the military. And I commissioned in 2020, which is in the middle of COVID. I commissioned into the Navy. It was an interesting time to join service and became a Navy JAG officer. So I got my law degree in 2021 and then shipped out that same year to join the Navy as a JAG officer, and then did my 5 years on active duty. I finished my active duty time in just last year, and then I've been working for the last few months as assistant chief counsel for ICE here in Atlanta.
That's just amazing, and the start into politics and in the military that young is something that uh, I'm glad to know you now, and that's one of the things with Veterans for America First and the things I'm doing with the Republican Party across the country, election integrity stuff, and especially the hard push of actually going against the status quo and the establishment of my party in Virginia. Um, you starting out that early, that your future is going to be phenomenal, and patriots like you are the ones that we need, and you're getting grassroots, hardcore experience so young that you're going to be able to take this and just explode with it, and you're the kind of people we need. And this is just an interview from the ICE perspective of a lawyer working for deportations, but this is something that I think I'll maybe see in the future that I end up interviewing you for Congress or something like that, if that's what you so choose to do. Um, you know, we talked a good bit before we started this, so we're on the same page on a lot of things, and we have some issues that are top on the people's minds. And as I said, I have Republican friends all over the country, but I also have liberal and independents. And one of the biggest, as we're talking about this, and I always talk about it, and I get mad at the news when I watch it, and I see things that I mean, I scream at the TV because I'm saying it's a lie. I know, I mean, I can't believe people are believing this stuff. And one of the biggest questions that I get is, what do you think about these masked men going indiscriminately like Nazis, busting down doors, trampling on the Fourth Amendment? I just saw it today, trampling on the Fourth Amendment, sweeping up people. It doesn't matter who they are; they're just scooping everybody up. And let's just start with that, and let's give you that's. I know that's not your actual job, but I know you being working for ICE, and you obviously know all the cases. You know how they were apprehended. You know the processes. We'll get into the processes and the different levels of the processes, uh, but I'd like you to just talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, boy, how things change because, I remember it wasn't too long ago that the common refrain from the left was that everyone needed to wear a mask.
All
And
right.
all of a sudden, we've done a 180-degree turn. I mean, on that topic, I think personally, I think the agents themselves probably don't want to have to be masked all the time. The reason why it's done is frankly because the environment has become so unsafe, and the environment has been made unsafe for many of these agents by the left themselves and by things that have been encouraged both by activists on the left, but also politicians and Congress people. You have Congress people going out assaulting ICE agents and then fundraising off of it and glorifying it. So we've created a culture in which it's now become the left has promoted stalking, harassing, getting in the face of law enforcement and worse, and assault and actually physically accosting them. And then they become shocked that the agents feel that they have to be masked to prevent them from being doxxed or harassed, and so that's the justification there. And I think if we could get the left to stop targeting our agents, then the masks would be less necessary. And in terms of the other point about the tactics, ICE wants to be having this process go with as less chaos as possible. I mean, the preferred method that ICE uses for detaining illegal aliens is to work with local law enforcement, preferably to get people directly from either local arrests that are done by police, people who are being picked up from prisons, people who are encountered at traffic stops. So we work with local law enforcement. Oftentimes it's local police. I'm in Georgia, so I have familiarity working with ICE in a red state. And in a state like Georgia, the local police do the original contact with the illegal alien, and then they can radio over to our agency to do a check on their immigration status. We do the check on their immigration status, and then the ICE agents can come and apprehend the individual either after they've been arrested and put into a local prison, or from the whatever apprehension has been done by the local police at that site. So when there's cooperation between the local police and our agency, the process runs much more smoothly. And you're not usually we get the vast majority of our illegal aliens that we detain here in Georgia come through the criminal justice process, and that is happening nationally too. So there's headlines that say that try to distort the statistics about how many people are actually coming with criminal records, but it's a large majority. There was a study from Cato, which is a libertarian organization that's become very kind of much more left wing, at least on the issue of immigration. And their headline was that 75% of illegal aliens who have been deported and detained do not have criminal convictions. Okay, well, when you read the fine print, they admitted that when you count people with criminal convictions or pending criminal charges, so these are the criminal charges are people who have been apprehended in the middle of criminal activity, then the number without convictions or charges drops to 40%, which means that a majority, 60% nationwide, have either a criminal conviction or a pending criminal charge in addition to being in the country illegally. So nationwide, we're still getting most of our illegal aliens from that population. In red states, it tends to be an even higher number. I notice anecdotally here in Georgia that I would say at least 70%, probably higher, maybe like 80% of the illegal aliens that I have put through removal proceedings have been referred to us from local law enforcement, or in the process of being apprehended by local law enforcement. So, when the state police and local authorities cooperate with ICE, then the process looks very different. The reason why the community raids or the community action is necessary in certain states is because there's no cooperation with between ICE and local law enforcement because the leadership at the state and local level has refused to allow the local authorities to cooperate with us and honor immigration detainers. I'll also say that the everyone focuses on the incidents that have happened in Minneapolis, where there were shootings where the ICE agent was involved. There was an incident in Virginia where there was an illegal alien who was apprehended for aggravated assault. He was went through a court hearing and was released on bond, and he was here illegally. So he could have, even after being released on bond on the criminal side, he could have been turned over to ICE and held in immigration custody. But because Virginia doesn't cooperate with, or this was Fairfax County specifically, so I shouldn't criticize the whole state, but because Fairfax County doesn't cooperate with ICE, they let him back into the community instead of handing him over to Homeland Security. And as a result, the very next day, he went and committed a murder. So that's somebody we could have avoided that death. We could have avoided that murder had he been turned over to immigration right away. Somebody who already had been charged with aggravated assault. But you probably didn't hear anything about that story until just now, or maybe you did, but your viewers
Yeah.
probably did not because it was not a national story. And that's what we're dealing with is, the people the illegal aliens who have criminal acts who end up hurting people or even killing people, that's not getting covered in the mainstream media. The murder rate in the U.S. is at a historic low, and I don't think it's a coincidence that as soon as we start cracking down on illegal immigration and getting serious about border security, many fewer Americans are losing their lives this year. That's the bigger picture that no one is focusing on. So ICE really is keeping people safe, and there are a lot more Americans who have died at the hands of an illegal alien than an individual who died because they were shot by an ICE officer.
Yeah, and that's something I have a lot of experience with different things. As we discussed before the show, I know a lot of, I mean, hundreds of law enforcement. For 10 years, I had a custom holster company. I've made holsters for Kydex holsters all over the country for special operators, law enforcement all over the country, civilians as well. But I became friends with literally hundreds of law enforcement, including ATF and marshals. And some of my good friends are like special agents of ATF. They moved up as I did that. They kept everywhere they went, or they got issued a new weapon. I was the one that made their holster for them. And I mean, to special agent in charge that ended up being in Kansas City as a special agent in charge of the intel division of the ATF. Another one that ended up going to DC to work in ATF headquarters. And then his second in charge became the special agent. And so I know I know what these people do, and I was in the military, but also when I got out, I worked for the Department of Corrections. And before I got into heavy into politics, I worked for about a year and a half in Special Forces school, the final qualifications course for Special Forces. So I know how the military thinks, and we all sit around and talk about stories. And when you talk to somebody that's a 20-year or even 29, 30-year Special Forces operator, and you spend weeks in the field with them, no shower, every night in the cold most of the time, sitting around the fire talking, you hear all the stories. And what people do not understand, even conservatives now that are saying, "Oh, this the ICE is just going too far," the Alex Petty thing, and the Renee Good. I always found it very, very interesting that let's go back to the George Floyd thing. You know, liberals and the left, they want somebody to get killed because then they can do this hell-raising house burn down, and they destroy their own cities, but they don't really care about these people. I'm convinced that Renee Good was for the left and the people that really want this thing blown up were waiting on somebody to get killed so they could explode the story and make the Trump administration look like Nazi crazies. And then you notice that sort of that was about a week, and now they're waiting on another one because her story's dying down because now you're starting to see that she was radical and this wasn't the first time. And then Alex Petty, and then he's a wonderful nurse. And don't get me wrong, look, nobody wants people to die. But I can tell you this from talking to hundreds of law enforcement, friends with some of the highest ones that do the door knocking, door kickings, they go after the worst of the worst. I've never heard one person that's actually had to kill a suspect, and I've never heard one police officer that's sitting around that has ever told me that they couldn't wait to go kill somebody. And I also know every single one I've talked to that had to shoot and kill somebody, it heavily bothered them, and some of them heavily bothered them mentally to where they never got over it. So this notion that these officers are just out just killing people and they can't wait for it is a bunch of BS. But secondly, what they don't understand is that we always have this second judgment thing. Well, they have to understand both those incidents, both of those individuals after we really found out the story that this was days and weeks of actually getting more and more aggressive. They have the videos now, kicking and breaking headlights, spitting on officers, spitting on the cars, blowing whistles right up in their face, right up within their face with cameras, asking them to assault them.
Yeah.
And it's ludicrous to think that an officer. I told a friend of mine the other day. I said, I just don't even know that I could do it. I said I'm pretty hardcore, and I would never want to even kill somebody. Not the fact that I just don't want to kill them and don't have to deal with it. I would if I had to, but just the legal implications of it and everything. Nobody's looking to do that. But what they
Yeah.
don't understand is the left has made it so much worse by agitating these people because they did want something like this to happen. I'm convinced of it. Nobody can convince me otherwise because it's obvious that it's a pretty proven fact that as soon as this happens, they lose their minds.
I
But
think we have to be able, I interject too. I think we have to be able to do two things, which is obviously be human about the fact that two people lost their lives and no one should be cheering that on or being heartless about the impact that that's going to have on people's families. At the same time, we have to be able to look at the bigger picture, at the statistics, as opposed to taking two incidents and extrapolating out that that is the way things always are, or that that represents immigration enforcement writ large.
yeah, and
Statistics are that if you compare ICE to your average police department, so I think your average police department has about one civilian death per 40,000 arrests, was the statistic that I saw last time I checked. Now, ICE has did about 600,000 apprehensions in last year in 2025. And I'm going to include the two incidents in Minnesota. It was basically around that same year because Trump came into office in January of 2020. So it's been about a full year. And within 1 year, there were about six or seven deaths at the hands of ICE agents of 600,000 apprehensions. Now, 6 to 7, and most of those were actually where the other party was armed and was firing back at the agents. So the death with Petty and Renee Good were the exception. That's one reason why they got so much coverage, because they were outside the norm. But that's a rate of 1 in 100,000. So, and the average police department is 1 in 40,000. ICE had a rate of 1 in 100,000. So one civilian death per 100,000 apprehensions or arrests.
Yeah, and
So, the ICE is, by that metric, ICE is twice as safe as your average police department. Now, I know the many people on the left are not fans of law enforcement in general, so you would probably have some people on that side of the aisle saying, well, we don't support police anyway. But I think most Americans respect their local police department and trust that police officers are keeping them safe and are not using force without reason. And when you look at ICE being twice as safe as your average police department, I think when you put it in those contexts, most Americans would realize that the picture they've been painted of the agency is not an accurate one.
yeah, and we're going to jump around. We have so much to talk about, but everything leads to something else. And you know, I'll it's awful interesting that we don't ever hear statistics other than some of the conservatives putting it out. You maybe see some posts with some pictures. Uh, why? I mean, like I said, we agree, and any human should agree that nobody should die. But when you put yourself in this situation, you continue to put yourself in this situation, you continue to agitate and get more aggressive, things are going to happen. But I wanted to make one clarification on the law enforcement side of those two incidents. Uh, People have to also understand that this is not just normal stuff. These people not only are dealing with the person that they're dealing with that they're afraid is they're going to run over with the car or that's going to pull the gun or has a gun and they don't know if they're pulling it or they have in the petty incident. Um, Likely it might come out miscommunication because, talking about, they already had disarmed him, but then the gun went off. But in the meantime, the officer said gun. Well, if the left will be serious about what's happening, that mayor and that governor incited people. They even got on national television. I saw it. It's there. It's undeniable. And it's either the governor or the mayor. I can't remember which one. Actually, I think it was the mayor encouraged his police officers to go fight ICE. It was on national TV. All right.
Yeah.
So if they're doing that and they're encouraging the average citizen to go do that in his site, people have to understand one thing. When these officers not only were dealing with these two incidents, especially the petty incident, but while they're doing that, they've been spit on for weeks. They've been bottles and bricks thrown at them, which is an assault. Which is, I mean, it seems like half the people should already been arrested to start with if we were being truthful about it. But the whistles are blowing, phones are in their face. Not only dealing with this person on the ground, they've got 20 or 30 sometimes or 50 people around them that they don't know what's going on, that could be on their backs. And for people to think that this is not going to happen are insane. But for people to think that the left didn't want it to happen are also insane because they did want it to happen. Uh,
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you're right that your average law enforcement agency, um, when they go and enforce the law, they expect that the criminal is going to resist them. But what they don't expect is that the broader community is going to also be targeting them, harassing them while they're trying to arrest the criminal. And that's something we have to deal with in ICE is that in certain places, when we are trying to do our job, it's not only that we have to worry about the criminal who's broken the law resisting, but then now we have the whole all these different civilians who are interfering with that process. And it does obviously create first difficulties in just performing the job. Second, it puts the officer at risk because the officer or the agent is not going to the officer doesn't automatically know who has good intentions and who doesn't all the time. Um, Again, and the officers, this one of the myths I think that we were alluding to. There are so many myths in this area. One of the myths is that these agents are just being sent out with no training, and that's ridiculous. First, the two people who were involved in these incidents had already been working for each of the agencies for a certain period of time. I think it was in the Alex Petty situation. First, they were CBP officers, so the media often gets the agency or the agency. We're both under Homeland Security, but obviously there's ICE that handles the internal removals and CBP, who is Border Patrol. And some CBP are now being brought in to do interior removals as well. But the Alex Petty situation involved mainly CBP agents, and the individual involved with actually with the shooting itself had been working for the agency for around 8 years. These are so we have experienced people who are doing these jobs. The idea that Trump is just, fast tracking people through training, getting them out on the streets and sending them to cause havoc, that's a ridiculous characterization. I think you're right that these tactic here has been chaos, because the American people elected Trump to enforce the border and enforce immigration policy. The American people still, according to polling, are largely in support of the deportation agenda. And the Democrats cannot win on the substance of the issue. So the tactic has been they're going to create as much chaos as possible so that Americans just throw up our hands and say, it's not worth it. Fine. We'll go back to having open borders because it's just too much chaos to try to enforce the border. That's kind of what they're hoping the American people will do. And they can't win on the issue, on the substance. So they're just going to create as much chaos as possible, so that people get tired of it.
Yeah. And I
And I
want to
think
go.
this isn't the first time they've done it. Yeah.
Yeah, and we need to move on, but I want to clarify a couple things because I know what people are going to say, because the next thing they're going to say is, well, we talk about criminals and they're dealing with criminals in the Petty case, and they're going to say, well, he wasn't a criminal, he was just a protester, even if he was getting a little aggressive. No, he was a criminal because he was interfering with ICE operations, which is a federal crime, and then secondly, he was also the week before he had already spit on their cars, kicked their car, and broke the tail light. We see that now. So yes, he was a criminal. He wasn't a violent criminal to maybe some people's definition, but hey, it happened. It shouldn't have happened. They wanted it to happen. They don't understand that ICE has been attacked and been, I mean, just dehumanized. And let's get to the masking thing. They're Gestapo with masks on. Well, you want the mask off, and if the mask come off, you're going to dox every single family, every single child, and every single spouse. So come off of that BS too, and then let's get into in those cases. Let's get in. We talked about before, um, why this doesn't happen in other states and especially red states that are having the same amount of deportation operations, and why they're even having to go door to door. And there's a second part of that question, but they're having to go. In my opinion, you can elaborate on. But I want to start to get into some others. We have so many good questions, but you know. Why does it always happen, and why are they doing so? They having to do so heavy of operations in these liberal blue terrible run cities is because they wouldn't have to be going door to door and doing this if they would have, because they are going after the hardest. And yes, they're end up catching people that maybe are just illegal immigrants that didn't do anything wrong, but they wouldn't be doing that if the criminals that we've been looking for were released back to the federal agents when they were supposed to be, when they were let out of jail to start with. So that's another big myth. And the fact that they're sweeping everybody up, we want to talk about that because that's your process.
Yeah.
And so that's the next thing the left does. Well, yeah, and a friend of mine told me that today. Yeah, well, they might have been going after the criminal illegal, but then there's a bunch of other brown people there. It's exactly that's exactly the wording. And there's a bunch of other brown people there, and they smashed them all up. Um, Talk about that process and what happens there. Because the whole start of that conversation with me was, well, they're not getting due process. So we can get into your job a bit about the due process while this is happening, and the legalities from the federal point of view when they go into these houses, um, and the Fourth Amendment argument keeps coming up. So they're going into these houses.
Yeah.
They claim there's no legal due process and all this other stuff, but tell us why they're doing that, and what happens to the people that do get apprehended, involved with the rest of them. And then there's a lot of other stuff I want to get into. We can lead into from that because it's crazy.
Yeah, so people are not being apprehended just because they look a certain way. The when if usually if there might be a target for a particular reason, either because they've been identified already as an illegal alien, they have some other criminal history. The agents might go in to get that one person, and oftentimes illegal aliens are going to be in groups together in the same communities. And so if there's suspicion that other people around them are also illegal, then based on questioning, if probable cause is established, then the agents can verify their immigration status with headquarters. And if they're, again, determined that they're here illegally, they can be apprehended based on probable cause. Now, those aliens, if they're apprehended and they tell the agent or they give any indication that they are a US citizen or a legal permanent resident, then we immediately at the legal office do a review of that case within 24 hours. Immediately has to be fast tracked. If they just so much as mention, "Hey, I'm a US citizen," that's immediately we do a review of that. We don't want to be detaining any US citizens, and we don't really. I think last I saw, again, out of that like 600,000, there was maybe 180 that had credible claims to be US citizens. And again, once we determine that they are a US citizen, they get released. If any other agency had that ratio of success, it would be a miracle in government. We really do make every effort. First, we don't detain U.S. citizens if there's any indication they are a U.S. citizen, and if they then make that claim, we have 24 hours where we have to look into the matter. We don't hold people indefinitely who we think might be U.S. citizens.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of the other due process, if you have a specific question, or
Oh,
I can just get into the
oh,
legal process.
another hot topic that is your answer is going to be beautiful, to actually inform the voter and the country really. The question of asylum. While these people are asylum seekers, they're just taking them and they're deporting them, and they're going to go back to their countries. This is great. Your answer is going to be great because I already know what's going to be. They're just taking them back to their countries where they're going to be killed and put in prison by their government or gangs and all that stuff. This is the answer is going to be beautiful.
Yeah. So there is a very clear definition for asylum. And to be an asylee or a refugee, the only difference between an asylee and a refugee is that a refugee applies from outside of our borders, and an asylee is someone who applies when they're within the country. But to be either of those categories, regardless of where you apply from, you have to prove that you would be persecuted by your government or a state actor, so someone affiliated with a government, on account of a protected characteristic. Now, those characteristics can be your race, your religion, your membership in a particular defined group. So it can't apply to a majority of the population. You have to prove that you are a discrete minority within the society, you are being targeted by your government or someone affiliated with that government, right? Um, so generally, gang violence, for example, doesn't apply to asylum for a number of reasons. First, the gangs are private actors, so they're not usually affiliated with the government. There are some exceptions to that. Obviously, there were gangs in Venezuela that were affiliated with Maduro, but in most places, the gangs are private organizations separate from the government. And also, gang violence is something that usually threatens everyone within the society, not just one discrete group. So saying that, you're an asylee because you fear a gang is not usually a valid asylum claim because pretty much anyone in that area could say the same thing. So, and that's done. We have the definition of asylum is supposed to be limited because it's only supposed to apply to the most serious cases. My grandparents were refugees from communist Hungary behind the Iron Curtain. They were forcibly removed from their home by the Soviets. They were an ethnic minority in their country, so they were targeted because of that, and they were sent to a displaced persons camp. So there's a very clear evidence of persecution by a government on account of a protected characteristic. And the reason the definition has to be narrow is to make sure that people who really need to come are the ones who we're giving the spots to. When you open up the definition to everyone, like what's been done recently, then you're not actually targeting the people who really need a spot. And that is what's been done, is that asylum has no longer become an exception to allow a small number of people to immigrate on that basis. It's become something that every illegal alien, or at least a very large portion of them, claim as a defense. So as soon as we apprehend them, sometimes they'll have been in the country for a long period of time. They've never claimed asylum before. So you can go and claim asylum at any time with USCIS, which is the agency that is supposed to adjudicate most of these asylum claims up front. But they never do that until they're apprehended and then claim asylum as a defense, sometimes many, many years after they first arrived.
I've
And
got a
then,
beautiful, yeah.
yeah.
I don't know if you might have been going to go into that, but so isn't it like the international standard or maybe even a law that if you are afraid and you need asylum from your country, that you're supposed to stop and claim asylum in the first country that you can go to that's safe?
Yes, so the international standard, and again, there's a lot of different kind of additional rules and expectations, but one of the big ones is that your asylum is meant just to keep you physically safe. Asylum is not meant to be like a catalog of all the countries in the world, and you look at it and see, which country you want to go to and use asylum to get there. That's not what asylum is. You have to just go to the first safe country, and usually that's a country that's neighboring to your country, because the whole point of asylum is you have to get outside of the control of your government. So long as your government is not also controlling the neighboring country, which usually is they're not, because the neighboring country would be under the control of a different government, you can go to that neighboring country and seek asylum there. And that's what you should do. And if you don't do that and you walk through multiple countries to seek asylum in the one that you want, then that country, the one that you ultimately get to, can decide that you're not a legitimate asylum seeker. And we've had that happen in the United States for many, many decades. So many of our asylees have crossed multiple countries to get here. You'll get asylum seekers from South America who have walked through at least 7 countries to get to the United States and not claimed asylum in any of those countries. And, when you ask them why they didn't claim asylum there, they just say, well, I didn't feel like it was safe enough for me there, or I didn't feel like I could earn enough money there. Sometimes they're pretty blunt about the fact that it's largely an economic motivation, which is probably the case for all of them. But again, asylum is not about finding the most safe or the most wealthy country. It's just about finding a country that will keep you protected from that one government that is targeting you.
Well, let me ask you
Um,
this. So obviously, if one, there's two parts to this. One, I'd like to know out of everybody that you take before the judges for deportation orders, how many of them claim asylum? And then when they're denied asylum, do you guys do something like offer to send them to the next closest country to their other country? And then what do they do that?
yeah. So the first question, I can actually give you some good news. Previously, the percentage would have been very, very high, definitely a majority, I would say, because under the Biden administration, everyone who came to the border and claimed fear. So if you came to the border and said, I'm afraid of being returned to my country, they basically just paroled you in. So they basically just said, yeah, we know you're here illegally. You've claimed fear of returning to your country of origin. We're going to parole you into the country. So we're going to allow you to come into the US. We're going to give you a court date. And they've let so many people into the country. The court dates were like years into the future, right? So people would get in automatically just by saying that they claimed fear, that they were an asylee. And then the court dates would be so far in the future, they would be able to live here for years and years and years without any real status, not really even thinking about their court date. And then if the court date came, they might not even show up because they were already in the country. So everyone was claiming asylum during the Biden years, and also they knew that even if they had come from countries where they'd passed safe countries on the way, that the Biden administration was not going to enforce that. So there was no penalty, and people weren't being detained during the Biden administration in the same numbers. So they could make these claims, while going about their daily life without any consequence. That has started to change under Trump for a few reasons. So the numbers, people still try to claim asylum as a defense, and there are definitely ways, even under Trump, we could be streamlining the process to weed out a lot of the illegitimate cases. But it's gotten much better because the Trump administration is no longer entertaining asylum cases from people who cross through safe third countries or people who walk through a country where they should have claimed asylum. So if you've come, from Central America and you've walked through other countries to get to the US and haven't claimed asylum in any of those countries, the Trump administration now has put in place what is called asylum cooperative agreements with other countries in the Western Hemisphere and even around the world. So now we have some with countries in Africa where we can send you back to those countries to claim asylum there. And you hit on this in your question. One of the best pieces of evidence for how a lot of these asylum claims are illegitimate is the fact that, so what will happen is the alien will claim asylum as a defense in removal proceedings. So we'll say you're here illegally, we can deport you. They'll say, well, I fear going back to my country, so that's my defense. So you can't remove me because I'm afraid of going back there. And then we at the Department of Homeland Security will file a motion with the court where we will say, okay, well, we know he's afraid of going back to his country of origin because supposedly, the standard is that he would be afraid of the government there. Well, we have an agreement with this other country that's not under the control of his government, and they're agreeing to take him and process his asylum claim there because that's where he should have taken it first. And the judge will explain this to the illegal alien. Well, all of a sudden, 99.9% of them, there's maybe been one or two cases where they've actually taken us up on it, but almost all of them will say, well, I don't want to go to that third country. If I can't stay in America, just send me back to my home country. I'd rather just go back to my home country.
Yeah,
Well,
because
if you were a legitimate asylum seeker, and we were offering you to go to a different country than the country you claim to be persecuted in, you would take us up on that offer. But they're not legitimate cases. They'll say what they need to say to try to avoid a removal order.
yeah, and that goes. We got other questions I wanted to lead into before this, but since this came up as far as the court and before the judge, I would like, we talked about the personal issues with ICE agents and the Border Patrol agents about the persecution and oh yeah they're Nazis with masks, but as soon as you take the masks off, that's what they want. Just like they wanted the death to expand the problem, they want the masks off because as soon as the masks come off, that becomes another problem. It's not about the mask; it's about give us the masks off so we can start doxing everybody. But even as a lawyer, um, and even working in the courts with the immigrants to process them. Tell us about your personal experience with uh, aggression and all these other things, and maybe even people that work there.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not out in the field, so I can only imagine it's much worse for agents who are uh, interacting more and more with people people out in the community, but we have all seen uh, just the level of, I mean, people will come to our office and be um, having like forming a barricade around our office, and the level of security that we have to have just for the immigration court is frankly more intense than what I've experienced on a military base. I was a former Navy JAG officer. And I will say, it is they don't know who it is that they're even targeting. It's not like they're just following around the agents or just going after the agents. Uh, there was a story. I'm not going to use any names, but we have people who work for the court who are court personnel, who are administrative in nature, and we have translators who work for the court, and these people who form these barricades around our office or who will like, protest outside of our office will get aggressive with them. And I think in one case, like there was a woman who had her car surrounded and people beating on her windows, and she worked as the court translator. And, she's a neutral party to all these proceedings. Um, and she was the one who was, and it's that environment that I stepped into that, you have to you kind of think about the worst case scenario that you know someone could be the rhetoric from the left has become so aggressive against the agency that somebody could take it on themselves to be a vigilante because that's what they think their congressman is encouraging them to do, and go and shoot up an ICE office. And I've had to have the conversation with my partner before I accepted the job about my safety. And when I was in the Navy, I never had that conversation. I never had the conversation, even though we've been together since I've been in the military. I never had the conversation with them when I was in the Navy about my safety and being concerned for my safety. But in ICE, we have had that conversation. And yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
we've had that.
and ironically, you said that usually the translators, I mean, they're neutral, but I would argue that I know some translators for illegal immigrants and things, and they actually are sympathetic. They're actually more on their side. That's why they're there because they want to help them and they want them to get their due process.
Well, I think this feeds into, I mean, you use the word due process again. I mean, this feeds into countering another myth that everyone seems to falsely believe. Not everyone, but that at least it's a myth that the media is trying to make people believe. I think I still have a lot of faith in the American citizen that they're able to see through some BS when it's given to them. And I think the media is trying to convince everyone that this is just some fascist system where they're rounding people up and sending people away, whether they're American citizens or not, and there's no law and order here. And the reality is that there is a robust system of due process. It is from beginning to end. And sometimes I mean, I think people would be surprised actually how how many protections there are. In a way that, I mean, it's sometimes like it's so bureaucratic to even deport one person through this system because of how many protections there are. I think people would be shocked at, kind of, and I'm in it every day, so I can tell you that, when we get an alien, referred to us, first, I already mentioned the protection. If they claim to be a US citizen, we have to address that issue right away. But again, that's very, 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 very rare. So then everyone else, once once they're being held in detention, or we have also people going through removal proceedings who are not detained, they're put through an immigration judge. There's an exception if they've been here for less than 2 years. There's something called expedited removal. That applies if they've been here less than 2 years and they're not claiming any um, form of relief. If they don't have any family members here, they're not claiming asylum, then there's a more expedited process. It still requires a legal review, but it doesn't have to go before an immigration judge all the time. But for everyone else, which is the majority of people usually, they're going before an immigration judge. The immigration judge is going to evaluate whether they are removable from the country. So, are they here legally or not? Or if they've been granted a visa, have they the provisions of their visa? That's usually that's the quicker part of the inquiry. Every once in a while, there will be a debate about, usually it's about the people with visas. It can be sometimes a little bit of a legal issue as to what actually qualifies as a violation of their visa or not. What criminal activity will make the visa go away. So people who are here on visas, certain crimes will make them ineligible to hold their visa. So we have to debate which crimes actually make them ineligible for their visa sometimes. So there sometimes is debate on that question, but usually it's a pretty clear and cut case. We're the government, we have the records whether they got a visa from us or not. And so usually they admit to being here illegally and they don't fight that part of the process. What usually takes longer is where we fight about whether they have a form of relief. And relief is one of the grounds where the government has said, by law, the government has said, well, we know you're here illegally, but if you fit one of these categories, we'll give you an exception. And the exceptions, again, were meant to be small and only cover a small number of people. And now the exception has grown to kind of basically engulf the whole system. So now these cases are largely litigated based on claims for relief as opposed to being litigated based on whether they're here illegally or not. And the main claims for relief are asylum, which I already mentioned, and cancellation of removal, which is a process for people who have family members here who claim, based on their family members, that they should be allowed to stay. After we litigate that, then they have the right to appeal. So they can appeal to the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is a higher level court. And then some of these cases even wind up into the federal judicial system, into federal district courts and such. So the idea, I mean, that's from beginning to end. And then within that process, you're having the judges are granting continuances, multiple continuances very liberally to respondents. Respondent is the legal term for the illegal alien in these proceedings. Um, Granting a lot of continuances for people to find attorneys, to work with attorneys, to file documents. They get a ton of time, months sometimes, to just file applications, and cases are reset while waiting for people to file forms of relief. They're very generous about people not meeting deadlines, very, very generous about illegal aliens not meeting deadlines to file things with the court. So they give people as much opportunity as possible. They turn over every stone to see if there's any way that people can stay legally in the US. And
Well, I
that's
have two
been my,
questions. Uh, I mean, question after question just pops up, but one, well, there's two big things that the left puts out, and they've convinced some tons of people. One is with the federal budget, and then the illegal immigrants are like fleecing our tax system, and then the left says no, 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 no. How many of all the illegal aliens that have come before you for deportation processes? How many of those people are on stuff like SNAP, food stamp, the SNAP, housing, Medicaid, all those things? And I wanted you to address that, and so I don't have to interrupt you for the next question. Uh,
so,
the other
so
big
I,
topic is all they're separating the families. So I know that they use the large family stuff as one of their excuses, but tell me about that too, because both of these things are things that the American people need to know, and especially the people that are starting to believe this stuff, that no, they're not doing that. They're good hard workers, especially even their tax returns and things like that. There's this thing can go so deep.
yeah. So on the first question about how many are on benefits, the and I don't most people who are going through removal proceedings, they're not going to like file a full financial disclosure as part of the evidence unless they're going through that the second process for relief I was mentioning, cancellation of removal. That process does require them to file uh, based on just proving the elements. They usually have to end up filing their financial disclosure, which includes the question about whether they've been on any federal benefits. And as part of the cancellation of removal process, they have to have a qualifying relative, and usually that's their children. And those families, it's about 100% that are on. In fact, I mean, again, I've seen the cases I work on, so I can only speak to the subset of cases that I've had. Of the cases that I've had, 100% of them, every single one, has been on some form of federal assistance, most commonly Medicaid and food stamps. Now they qualify often through the children because the children are U.S. citizens, but the children are so young that the money is obviously being paid to the parents, right? I mean, they're the people who are um, these are the money is being paid to support families headed by illegal aliens. So when you see some of these studies, like Cato released a study where they said, um, native-born Americans use X amount less welfare, or the native-born Americans use more welfare than immigrant Americans. Well, they were counting all the children of illegal aliens who are born here as Native Americans. But that's kind of, that's ridiculous because they're part of households that would be the whole household really would be classified as being headed by an illegal alien, and the legal alien is the one who's the money is being paid to because the government is not signing the check to a 5-year-old. And when you actually break out the data by households, so when you look at what percentage of households are on public assistance, the percentage, and this is research that's been done by the Center for Immigration Studies, so I should provide my source. And the percentage of households of immigrant households on welfare is higher than households that are headed by a native-born American. So this is very common. The people, illegal aliens often qualify through their kids, at least at the federal level, because obviously many federal benefits are going to require some form of legal residency. But then at the state and local level, there's additional benefits, and that varies depending on where they are. So some states and localities, in fact, most of the blue states aren't checking immigration status at all
Mhm.
for local
Yeah,
benefits.
that gives me two more questions. So that brings us into Trump's push for the anchor baby thing. And the second part of that is on average from the people that they've actually done the studies on and people that you've encountered, how many children on average did they have? Because that's another big thing, especially with Veterans from America First. We have veterans need, I've always complained about our own citizens that are non-productive, that could work, that don't, that bleed the system. But I'll even go as far as to say those people should get the money before an illegal immigrant that's non-citizen should get
Yeah,
it. But
yeah.
then you got veterans on the street, you've got homeless people on the street. There's been cases where liberal cities have put literally veterans on the street and replaced those with illegal immigrants. That's ludicrous to me. But follow the question: how many average children do these people have? And tell us the legalities and why Trump's pushing on the anchor baby thing and what that originally was meant to be.
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I don't have statistics in terms of the average. What I can say in my experience has been that the average family size of the families who apply for cancellation of removal, the family size is very large, and I've had a disproportionate number of cases for people who have six, seven, eight children. In fact, the first three cases I had when I started the job were in rapid succession: an illegal alien with eight children, seven children, eight children. Like that was and those are the first three cases that I had, and they try to qualify to stay in the country based on the children. Now, sometimes they do stay involved in it's an individual assessment, and sometimes they stay more involved with the children than other times. There are some who are, they're here illegally, so they committed a crime, and I'm still going to try to say, hey, you got to leave, and that probably will mean you take your family with you back to your home country, and then even if they are more present parents, right? You don't get to enjoy the benefit of your criminal behavior. But there are other cases, obviously, where they're using the children as a way to stay in the country, even though they don't have much of a relationship with the children. And we try to obviously bring that out when we're evaluating the claim, and we're able to cross-examine the illegal alien. And I had a case where an illegal alien had 8 children with multiple different women. So he was claiming, he had multiple different women. He had domestic violence charges against many of these women too. And that's another thing that the illegal aliens will. It seems in a lot of these cancellation cases, there's a high propensity of domestic violence, and we've encountered that. And oftentimes they'll say that it was merely a verbal disagreement, and then I released evidence showing that two of them had to go to the hospital with broken bones. But in terms of his relationship with the kids, on the stand, he said that he was needed, he was a present father, even though they were with multiple women. And then I asked him if he could give the names and birth dates for all these children, and he couldn't remember any of their birth dates.
Mhm.
So he's not father of the year. But that's kind of an example of how there is an incentive to having children here is an easy way to then gain an anchor, hence the term anchor baby, and give you some sort of way of applying for one of those forms of relief. Um, it does, on the bigger point about social welfare here, and I'm a conservative. I believe that we should be um, judicious about welfare. We should be a springboard to something else as opposed to keeping people in a cycle of dependency. However, I think what we can all agree, or we should all be able to agree, is that welfare was built around an idea of a social contract where the government said, like, as Americans, as native born Americans, as people whose families have been here for a certain period of time, our families had sacrificed certain to build the country, to serve in its military for over a certain period of time. And so the government said, okay, in recognition of that, if your family falls on hard times, then we're going to help you out. Right? That's the social contract between people who have helped to build the country and the government as it relates to welfare. Well, that social contract breaks down if government is giving welfare to people who have just arrived. That would be legal immigrants, but especially if they're giving welfare to people who haven't even tried to come the right way,
Mhm.
and who have just shown up and immediately been handed benefits. I mean, they haven't invested anything in the country so far. And yet they're still collecting benefits from it. And so I think that is clearly on a moral level, in addition to the economics of it being unwise, on a moral level, it just should strike most people as wrong and
Yeah,
unfair.
yeah.
And especially when, I mean, I can't help but I'm in a long-term relationship. I'm a millennial. I want to have kids. And like many people my age, it's expensive, and we've put off that life decision many, many, many years. And I talk to a lot of friends who just, they put off big life moments just because things are more expensive than they have been. And then I see that I'm paying for these massive families, paying for everyone else's, the illegal alien who's having 8 children. I'm paying for that, but no one's helping me have children. No one's supporting me and my partner and
Let me
our
hit you. Let me hit you now. Let me hit you another couple questions. It just keeps bringing up more because I have a lot of inside sources and stuff too on some numbers and what really goes on. But this is a big one that my liberal friends hit me with. Well, when they go in and they snatch up a bunch of people, and we already just discussed all that problem. I don't think we covered that. Their big argument that they hit in the news is, oh, well, they're not just. It's always that they're not just getting convicted criminals. They're getting other people. There's a difference because a lot of those people, we discussed that. A lot of those people, they lie in a deceptive way when they talk about this, and even the statistics, because just because they're not convicted criminals doesn't mean they don't already have charges.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I agree. You're right. And first, I should say that I mean, I think we can all agree that if you are an illegal alien plus you commit an additional crime, especially if it's a really serious crime, that is uh, even more egregious than just being here illegally. However, even if you are just here illegally, you've committed a crime. And I don't think we should normalize that by saying, well, so long as that's their only crime, we're not going to take it seriously. We should take it seriously. We have immigration laws for a reason. Immigration laws, I think, are some of the most important laws any country is going to have, especially a democracy where the citizenry determines the character and the whole nature of the country. I mean, who we let into America becomes America. That's because we're a
Yeah.
democracy. So we're only as good as the citizenry we have.
Well, we know, I mean, I've traveled in a lot of places in the world, especially Asia, and a country without a border. I mean, this Democrat narrative that I saw on the Grammy Award thing or whatever it was the other night, those people are flat out nuts, the stuff they were saying. There's no what is it? There's no illegal on stolen land. Come on,
Yeah.
throughout history, the governments rise and fall, and the land changes hands. Is it a perfect history? No. Is slavery perfect? We just would have should have never had. We wish we wouldn't have had it, but it happened. But you learn from that, and if you don't learn, these people are trying to erase history. But even in the countries that these people leave, most of them have more secure borders than we have. But I want to be more fair. This entire talk, we do talk about the left because they're the ones inciting things. They're the ones that put out most of the lies, and this is all. I put out a piece on Facebook a while back that about talking about when I worked in Special Forces School, Robin Sage. Well, Robin Sage, that course is their final qualifications course, two weeks in the field. Everything that the Special Forces candidate has done, which is unbelievable, the things, the psychological evaluations, the things that they had to do. I mean, you even failed the course for getting assigned a a campaign where if you fail your navigation leading your team, you fail the course. I mean, it's very strict. But
Yeah.
in doing many of those courses with these guys, what people don't understand, Special Forces operators, one of their main missions is to go in as a small team, usually a 12-man team, and they go into countries and they rise up the citizens against their government. And how they do that is changing public opinion by doing the exact same. Somebody's funding these people, somebody's organized. All these people, and you also wonder why it seems to be a lot of white crazy liberals, and I'm going to say it because it's you can look and see that and that the illegals and don't even care about most of these people. But you wonder, do these people really work? And we find out now a lot of them are even saying I'm getting paid right now. Well, that's been on the news, but they're not all these thousands of dollars in signs, all the mobilization, all the apps to track and dox ice, all these things. I argue that this is a concerted effort by the the Democrat Party or Soros people or whoever it is. It doesn't matter. But this is obviously all my special forces operator people that I've talked to. They all say the same exact same. This is a special forces type operation of turning the people against their government, and anybody that wants to deny that is not in reality. But I also want to clarify. We have talked about the left and the Democrats and all that, but the one of the reasons we're dealing with this has been Republican and Democrat administrations for decades. I
Right. You're
mean,
very
I mean,
right about that.
Republicans don't fix it, I don't think they want to fix it. Only now that we have President Trump that's doing it, and I think that's why the bigger outrage and why people are more pissed off because the people in power never wanted this fixed, including Republicans, or they would have fixed it when they had the power. And
Yes.
argue even like with our state legislature here. It seems like the Democrats right now. I'll make a case in point. Democrats, when I was working in Richmond as a legislative aide, we put in bills that would help inner city people. I don't even have to name the bills. I'm telling you, it's a fact. We put in multiple bills that would help poor folk and minorities and people of color. And the senior minority legislative senators and House members would not let that out of committee and call us racist and things like that. And I argue that, and I know that to be a fact, is that I just did a piece on abortion and all these other things. Uh, these legislators don't want the problem fixed because if the problem goes away, their fundraising goes away, and their hot buttons to excite their base goes away, and that goes on. That's both sides, and that's one of the things Republicans need to start doing and holding their people accountable and start pounding this too, because this isn't overall, it's a Democrat thing now, but it's really a Republican and a Democrat issue because they've all done it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean you're right, and you hit the nail on the head when you talked about the fact that this is not a I mean today I would say it is more of a Republican Democrat issue because the leader of our party is Trump, and he has finally he's taken it seriously, and he's even if he's had to drag some other Republicans begrudgingly to his point of view, I think at least for at least while he's at the top of the party, this is going to be what we represent, and that's I think that's a positive thing that we have that we've made that distinction. But there's a reason why Trump was necessary because the Republican Party did not always was not always consistent on this issue, and oftentimes there was a uniparty of Republicans and Democrats that were facilitating this problem. And we had a lot of Republicans that were beholden to certain business interests that benefited from large numbers of low wage, unskilled immigration coming across that border. And I have had a lot of cases come across my desk that originated with the George W. Bush administration. And I had an individual who had 20 criminal charges. So this was, and again, I'm not using names, I'm just giving you kind of general facts, but 20 criminal charges, two domestic violence convictions, discharging a firearm in public, three DUIs. He had was apprehended for driving without a license a number of times, an assault conviction. So like 20 over the course of he'd been here since for about 25 years. So he racked up 20 convictions during that time. And he came during the first Bush administration and then was racking up a large number of these charges when Bush was in office. And he was in South Carolina, is in a pretty conservative state, and never put through immigration proceedings.
Well, like we're
Uh,
coming up on an hour. I want to I'd love to have you back because what I want to do, I'm asking everybody that watches this video to post in questions because we'll do a follow up and maybe we can talk about a lot of the topics because we're going to hear, I'm sure people try to counter what we're saying or give us more questions or even give us info of their personal experiences. But one of the other big top points that the left is hitting, that same thing I get hit with when I get into conversation, I get hit with it, the separation of the families, and they all and I want to make a statement and then have your answer because I'll ask the question, but then I want to make my observation of some things. The separation of families, and I want you to discuss what you've seen with your work, but and we'll use the 5-year-old boy issue for one. I'm sure you probably don't know the exact statistics, but we know there's something there with that and other things with separating the families. But the separating the families thing started with Obama. He's the one that built the cages that they're complaining about Trump using. And I understand also that during the immigration process coming in with Obama letting people flood in, we talked about the asylum thing. Well, yeah, well, there was NGOs being paid by the government, our tax dollars, to fund these people for thousands and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, to walk through these 7 states. They didn't do that for free. They were funded, and the Biden administration when they were doing it, they didn't even they let more people out onto the streets because they didn't want to build more. They had so many people they were allowing in, they didn't even want to build places to hold them, so they just let them out anyway.
yeah,
So those two things, that's my observations and it's my observations from inside sources too, that those are likely facts. But the 5-year-old boy thing, and then I just like to put out for the people watching this is to think about something else. Yes, we talked about it's a tragedy that two people have gotten killed, on camera that the Democrats I'm sure love the ones that like this. I'm not, and that's another thing. It's not all Democrats. It's more the left that have the problems, just like the further right a lot of times are the ones that cause us the problems and things on in certain issues. That's the ones you usually if we have a problem with the right, which we don't have most of the time, but the further right, when Charlie Kirk, your friend, got killed. Um, we didn't go burn cities down. They did a 100,000 person vigil and prayed and people prayed across the country. We didn't go burn stuff down, and he wasn't even a lifelong criminal. George Floyd gets killed, which was wrong, and the officer was convicted, a due process, and I assume he's still in prison. But they lose their minds and make him a martyr. Yet and then they complain about all the illegal immigrants that were snatching up and putting out that uh, especially the criminals that are murderers and assaulters and things like that. Yet you never hear one thing of some crazy liberal losing their their shit over, truthfully, uh, of all the people that the illegal immigrants have murdered that are civilians,
Well,
they're citizens.
yeah,
Why didn't there the same outrage? That astonishes me.
yeah, no, I agree. I mean, one thing I'll say about the argument you or the myth you wanted me to counter about the family separation. So that happens anytime there's any criminal activity and someone is paying the consequences of criminal activity. Uh, Anytime you put someone in jail, you are separating them from their family. No one makes that argument when it comes to someone being put in jail for a DUI, for an assault, for sexual crime, for a murder. No one makes that argument for any other crime, right? When we put someone away in jail for doing something illegal, we are separating them from their family. And usually, for most crimes, we're doing it for much longer than they spend in immigration detention. When you put someone away in prison, punishing them for a crime, usually it can be for many, many years when they're separated from their family. With immigration, they're only in detention while their case is being heard. And then if they're removed back to their home country, there's no reason why the family can't go and join them in the home country if they themselves are not in deportation proceedings. So, the goal of ICE is not to separate people from their families. We have to detain people temporarily while they're going through proceedings, but that's only while they're in removal proceedings. And then as soon as there's an adjudication, there's nothing stopping the family from being reunified in the country of origin.
Mhm.
And that's a better outcome than most other uh, criminal processes where after the process is over and the person is found guilty, they would stay in jail and be actually separated from their family for the long term. So this idea that I mean, you could apply the term family separation to, you could use that as a justification to let any criminal out of jail. So, oh, they're separated from their family. Well, as society, we have to deter crime. And that includes immigration crime, because when we don't deter it and we don't take it seriously, we get what we had for the past 4 years, where everyone tries to come illegally across the border because they know there's no consequence. So you have to deter crime. And in order to do that, you have to detain people and remove people who commit immigration violations.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
look, let's. I hope you'll come back and we do a follow up when I get all the heat and we're gonna have a lot of good comments. I'm sure we're gonna have some trolling on there, and I just like to commend you one for taking the time for one, and but commend you for even doing it because that's I think another issue that the left one of their game plans is to make it so hard that people like you don't even want to do it. And just like the political world has made it hard, it's hard for people to get into politics because they're going to get beat to death. Their families are going to get beat to death. So it takes a warrior, really, and that's one of the reasons we're out supporting and recruiting military and law enforcement for our
yeah,
cause because those are the people that can stand the heat. And I commend you for doing it because it's got to be stressful, and plus you're actually doing a service to the immigrants that actually should be here. And I
yeah,
appreciate it,
yeah,
man.
I come from I was raised by that grandmother I mentioned earlier, she was a legal immigrant, and no one, I mean, I got a lot of my views from her. You talk to people who came legally, and oftentimes they're the people who are the most strict in their views about immigration because they said, hey, if I did it right, you should have to do it right too.
Yep.
And I do think, you know, I very much, and I still am in the Navy Reserve, so I still have, I still maintain my connection to the Navy and my love and respect for everyone in the military. Um, there is something special about what I'm doing now with DHS, where I did have a moment or two, especially when I'm deployed overseas, realizing, hey, I'm protecting borders everywhere else in the world. I was in Japan. Every one of our allies in Asia. We're protecting Taiwan with our umbrella. We're protecting Japan. We're protecting South Korea. It's nice. It feels nice to do a job where I'm protecting the borders of the country that I'm actually sworn to defend.
Yeah.
Um,
And
you know?
one last observation that I'd just like to make a comment because I want to actually find out the numbers, but I also know because when I got out of the military, I actually was going to apply for Border Patrol, and because obviously you apply for law enforcement. I got a job in Department of Corrections in Virginia, but I was going to apply for ATF, bunch of things. And I took the first job that I could get coming right out, and I was going to just use that as a springboard. Then I got into other things, but I didn't apply for Border Patrol because the large percentage of who they were hiring were Spanish speaking people. So I think that's another thing people should really look at it. I'd like to know the percentage of people that are ICE and Border Patrol because they have most of them have to speak Spanish, so they have to have a lot of Spanish people in that system. So I'd be very interested to know. I bet you it's a large percentage that are actually Spanish heritage people that are ICE and Border Patrol.
Yeah,
So it's
well,
not like they're just out. It's not just like they're out wanting to destroy their own people.
yeah, I can tell you agency in terms of at large, ICE is I think about over 30% um, non-white in terms of the workforce, which is among the agencies within DHS, one of the highest rates and a relatively high rate for the government as a whole. My office is extremely diverse office. I mean, again, I don't think that makes something de facto, like that's not, that doesn't make something necessarily good or bad. It's just kind of does kind of refute the argument from the left that this is a racial issue. It's an issue of law and order. It's an issue of people who respect what the rules are, people who have followed the rules, wanting other people to follow those rules as well. Having an orderly society of people who respect our laws. And if your first action coming to the United States is to break our laws, that doesn't set you up well for being a
That's right.
contributing member of society. So,
Yeah. Hey, guys, Evan Draim, look, the time you spent, I know you had a hard day. We actually had to postpone our video
yeah,
because you got stuck at work and everything else. I appreciate you, and I hope you'll come back and we'll do a follow up with this because I know I'm going to have at least another good hour of things to talk about after this is starting to air. And thank you
well,
so
great.
much.
I mean, I'm passionate about it, so I enjoy talking about it. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you.